How's it going, team? Welcome back to another episode of the Average Jacks podcast, where we bring you real stories, expert insights, and practical tips to improve your life. I'm your host, Jack McKeenan, and today we've got an awesome guest with us, Amy Carter, a certified health coach who specialises in energy optimisation and stress management. Amy's mission is simple but powerful. She's here to spread the word that we don't have to accept feeling exhausted, frazzled, or worn down all the time, even in the middle of our busy lives. In this episode, we dive into some really effective yet simple nutrition and lifestyle changes that can help us boost our natural energy and create a sense of balance. You deserve to feel nourished, vibrant, and in control of your well-being, and that's what Amy is here to show you and how you can get there. We hope you enjoy this conversation and take away something valuable to apply to your own life. And hey, if you do, please don't forget to review and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us grow and able to bring you more content. But before we get started, as always, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Viribus Strength. You can grab 20% off their amazing fitness gear using the code AverageJack at www.viribusstrength.co.uk. And of course, for more updates and more content, head over to www.jackmckeenan.co.uk. Now, let's dive into this episode with Amy Carter. Peace. So, how have you been? You okay?
Yeah, I've been good, thank you. Yeah, it's been a busy week, but yeah, going well so far. How about you?
Yeah, it's been a busy week for me with work and that and the role, sort of working in a university with Freshers Week.
Yeah,
It's just
wow.
carnage. So I'm hoping to pick your brain and get some
Yeah, go
personal
for
insight for
it.
myself of dealing with stress and things like that. So
Yeah, definitely.
before we sort of get into the main body of it, I always like to ask the guests a bit about the background, what they were like when they're younger, is this where they envisage themselves today, and how you got into the niche that you're in. Especially for you, I'm really interested to see how this came about. So a little bit about you, if that's
Yeah, of
okay.
course. So yeah, now I work as a health coach. So I essentially provide support to individuals who are looking to improve their health and achieve and sustain their health goals for the long term. And as you mentioned, I have a focus on stress management and energy optimization as well. So a lot of my work is like working with professionals or corporates to kind of help people in those busy careers better manage stress and optimize their energy in an environment where, you know, typically people feel very stressed, very exhausted, and helping them establish healthy habits in a way which works for them, works for their lifestyle, and yeah, whilst they're juggling lots of other things. So yeah, that's essentially what I do now. But I came to this career, actually I had a previous career in law. So I was a solicitor until about a year ago.
Wow.
Um, and during my training and, you know, at certain points during that career, I myself felt very stressed, felt tired, exhausted a lot of the time. And at that time, I didn't really have the tools and the resources I needed to like look after myself properly in that quite fast-paced environment. So that's really how I got into health. I've kind of always been a bit interested in health, but that really sparked my interest again. And, you know, I thought to myself, there must be more I can do with my lifestyle and my diet to support myself through these stressful times. And so, yeah, that led me to kind of requalify, and I just really found a passion for it. So decided to move careers. So yeah, that's a bit of a background.
That's super interesting. So why law? What brought you to law initially?
I actually did law A level. My school, yeah, provided law A level, and I really enjoyed it then. And so when picking a university degree, like that seemed like the sensible choice. And yeah, just kind of carried on down that path really. Like did work experience while at university, then decided to apply for a training contract and go down the solicitor route. And yeah, just kind of just carried on down that path that was set, I suppose. Um, But yeah, obviously things have changed now.
So going from, getting into law, and you mentioned about it being fast paced, and I imagine
Mm.
very, very pressurized from the outside looking in, and I don't have any sort of first hand experience with that, so I'm not going to try and make out like I do, but I can only imagine that it's very pressurized, and there's a lot sort of. Is it a job that you took home with you? It wasn't something that you just left at the office hours.
Yeah, it was definitely, you know, not every day, but quite a lot. You had sometimes you had to work longer hours. And I mean, when I started, actually, it was just after COVID, so I was working at home anyway. So, as in, it was definitely something I took home with me, and I had my desk in my bedroom, and it was just there was kind of that became a bit like my world. There was no escaping it because we were in lockdowns and all that. Um, but yeah, I think typically it is an industry where you're expected to work more than 9 to 5. And that was the case in my experience, especially at certain points in my career, like I said. Um, and if you're not equipped to deal with that and you're not maybe expecting it, or you haven't, set yourself boundaries and lifestyle practices that are going to support you through that, then I think it can be quite challenging and it can have impacts on your health.
You mentioned about obviously the pandemic and people working from home. I worked from home
Mm,
when COVID happened, and you said there about you literally take it home with you. And
yeah,
something I never realised until afterwards is when you go to work and you come home. I don't know if you felt like this, like when you actually have an office and somewhere, it's very easy to differentiate your life and sort of section them into this is
yeah,
home, this is work. But when you remove that and you create that sort of haze in between the two,
yeah.
it's such an additional stress, because I always found that the job I did I enjoyed, but it wasn't a passion of mine at the time. It was a different job than what I'm doing now.
Mm,
But I'd find myself working till like 5:30, 5:45 without even thinking about it, because
yeah.
everyone wasn't getting up and leaving, and there wasn't that, oh, we finish in 5 minutes. You just get on with the job and sort of get sucked into it, and
Exactly.
there was just a blur. But do you think that's a common thing now, because there's so much more working from home in a lot
Mm.
more roles, isn't there, since the pandemic? Is that something you see, especially in the corporate world and working with people?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. I think, yeah, since the pandemic, there's definitely been an increase in people working from home or doing a sort of hybrid split between the two. And I think it's quite individual in terms of whether that's working from home actually helps people with stress or is a stressor. I think, like you said, if you're, working longer hours, or maybe younger people who are in house shares and are working in their bedrooms and don't really have that separation between work and their personal life, that can then cause working from home to like add to stress. But at the same time, I think there are benefits. I know that when I was working from home, kind of doing a bit of hybrid, and the days that I worked from home, for example, I could much more easily fit in going to the gym in my lunch break, or going for a walk, or just like, yeah, nipping to an exercise class after work without having to do the whole commute. And so I think, yeah, it's a really individual thing, and I think it can both be a burden and a positive in different ways.
So you mentioned then about it being individual and certain things
Mm.
affecting certain types of people. Working with obviously predominantly corporate individuals and people who work in business and things like that. What's probably the most common thing you see that affects people and sort of makes them the most that causes them the most stress?
Interesting. I think I don't really know if there's one universal thing. I think a lot of people are juggling a lot. They've got maybe a busy job, a demanding job. They're also traveling between London and like various different areas on the train all the time. They're also constantly connected on their phones. They've also trying to like keep up their fitness, and they've got to eat X amount of fruit and veg a day, and they're trying to look after their family, whatever it is. I think a lot of people just feel overwhelmed and they've got a lot to deal with, and it's juggling all that in a way that doesn't just kind of, completely overcome you, I suppose.
Yeah, so that's sort of interesting when you mentioned there about the commute and things and going back to the working from home.
Mm,
That's where there definitely was a benefit, because there's nothing worse to add to your day than like an hour commute. But I imagine in
yeah,
the corporate world that, it's just so ingrained to be like, oh, my working hours are 9 to 5, but I'm up at 5:30 to get, the hour commute, and then I'm taking the hour and a half commute home.
exactly.
Is there ways that people can sort of that you may have come across? This may be a yes, this may be a no. To sort of make the commute more positive, like listening to things, or creating a different relationship with it by incorporating new habits. This is a personal thing,
Mm,
because obviously I think majority of us have some form of a commute, and I
yeah.
think we've all experienced some form of a commute. And I have my own things that I'll add that I do what make it better. But I'd love to hear sort of what you come across and what you see, if anyone's ever recommended or pointed out things that you thought, yeah, that's a brilliant way to optimize a commute.
Yeah, interesting. This isn't actually something that I've worked on with clients, but in my own experience, in the last like year or so of working in corporate, I kind of changed how I was spending my time on the commute, and I did notice a definite benefit for myself. And I think traditionally I would always just like put my headphones straight on and listen to whatever, Discover Weekly, whatever it might be. Um, but then in the last year or so, I started moving away from my phone and I started reading on the tube. And I found that for me was a lot better. It was a better way to switch off because you're just disconnecting from electronics, which, I was on all day at work on a laptop computer, and actually creating a bit of space. And kind of being in the real world around the real sounds around you. So I found that quite beneficial. But I know you can do things like commute meditations and mindfulness and maybe like soothing music. It might be a bit of a more calming way to start the day rather than, your usual playlist, whatever it might be.
Commuting, what was that you said then? The commuting meditating, did you say? Was it
Yeah.
that would be interesting to try.
Yeah,
I'll
I've
look
never
into
tried it
that.
myself, but I have an app where I do like mindfulness meditation sometimes, and I've seen it on there. So yeah, maybe I'll give it a go someday soon. I'll let
Yeah,
you
you'll
know how
have
it goes.
to report back on that one, because that
I
definitely does
will.
sound interesting. So, commuting, working in the office, all them sort of stresses. A lot of people, when you talk to them, they sort of go in aeroplane mode when they're in these environments of offices and fast-paced life, and they probably have an understand. This is coming from my personal opinion, so I don't want to speak on people's behalf, but
Mm,
definitely something I've done is I've not realised how stressed I've been until I've got
yeah,
to like a point of, maybe burnout, or even just being like, even feeling ill and run down. I think a lot of
yeah.
the time, when people feel like that, it does sort of present itself in illness. What what are some of the things that the average person could maybe pinpoint to sort of know that they're stressed, but look for, like warning signs before they get
Mm,
to that sort of precipice of maximal stress? Thinking
yeah,
like, oh, I've noticed this about myself. I've noticed that I'm doing this. Is it because I'm
yeah.
stressed?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's really common, definitely in my experience too. You don't realize you're stressed until you're extremely stressed, because I
Mm.
think when you're just a little bit stressed, we almost feel quite energized by it. A little bit of stress causes us to feel a bit like we're like Superman, Superwoman. Like I can do the longest to-do list, I can work late, I can fit it all in, and you can kind of sustain that for a while. But on the inside, your resources are getting depleted and you are getting more tired, but your stress hormones are just kind of masking it a bit. So yeah, when it then hits a certain point, you often just feel very, very exhausted. Um, so in terms of things to look out for, I would say sleep is a big one. If we are stressed, then we'll often struggle with our sleep. So that might be struggling falling asleep, or it might be things like waking up at 3, 4 in the morning and struggling to get back to sleep. That can often be a sign of stress. Um, It's also useful to think about energy, and if you're constantly reaching for sugary snacks, you're having cravings throughout the day, you're feeling like you need coffees and flapjacks, whatever it might be, to pick yourself up and get you through the next few hours of work. That's also a sign that maybe you're stressed, or maybe you're just not quite giving your body what it needs to power you through and fuel you at the moment. I say those are two key signs to look out for.
So I'm gonna like out myself here. You mentioned something there about turning to cravings and different things. A massive one for me, and I should have shame in it. Maybe not some shame, but I am just a fiend for caffeine and energy drinks, and that's a
Mm,
very very common thing, isn't it? And we see it
yeah.
so much. What are how do these sort of habits that we have of turning to sugary cravings, caffeine, energy drinks, how do they impact stress levels? I'm assuming that they probably don't do much positive for them if you turn into them as sort of short-term solutions. And is there any sort of healthier alternatives that you've come across that you would recommend?
Yeah, so yeah, caffeine and sugary drinks, yeah, it's an interesting one. I think they do impact stress levels, and having our bodies having to process extra sugar, extra caffeine can cause additional stress to our bodies. So we want to avoid that, especially if we're already stressed. But with caffeine and sugar, the main thing that I usually look at is energy. I think they have a bigger impact on energy than they do on stress. And people reach for them when they're tired, when they're exhausted, they feel like they need an energy boost. Um, but actually, these things, they give the appearance, and they make us feel like we're having an energy boost for maybe an hour or two, and they do to some extent because they're giving us a boost of sugar. But actually, I don't know what your experience is, but usually 1, 2, 3 hours later, we get this huge crash. And that often leaves us feeling worse than we felt before. And then obviously we want to like have another one to make us feel better again. And it gets us into this cycle of energy spikes and crashes. And that usually leads people to feel pretty rubbish by the end of the day. Yeah, I don't know what your experience is, but that's the main cycle I kind of see with caffeine and sugar.
Yeah, I find personally as well, you get to a point where there is just no stimulus from these things. You
Mm,
sort of turn to them and they just become a daily thing, or like you said, I, I'm a lot better than I was. It's something that I've been mindful of and tried to
mm,
be better with. But there was times where I was having coffees, energy drinks, and like you get to the point where you'd be doing that a couple of times of each in a day, and it just wouldn't even be sort of giving you what you are looking
yeah,
for. Either way, it just
yeah, you
becomes
build up
sort
a
of a security
tolerance.
blanket, and you're like,
Yeah,
I need this to sort of do it. But people do that with sugar, don't they? What I've noticed,
yeah.
especially working in offices, is that people are, oh, I'm addicted to sugar. But
Mm,
I might be wrong. I don't know if there's any science about this, but I don't think you can you be addicted to sugar? Like, or is it just sort of the
I
habitual
think you
thing with it?
can. Yeah, like don't quote me. I
No.
haven't got the research
I'm
papers
not
to back
asking.
it
Yeah,
up.
this is just a general. I'm not like outing you and
But
expecting you to know, but
I think you can. I've definitely seen yeah, articles or whatever saying that sugar is extremely addictive, and it does kind of give you that I don't know, like gratification, doesn't it? And you want to
mm,
reach in for more. Like you never just have one square of chocolate, or not very often.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so I think it can be addictive, but it's with all these things, like, being mindful of it is the really important first step. And once you're mindful of a habit and mindful of what you're really craving, like in that moment, you might not actually be craving an energy drink. What you're craving is the energy. And then once you kind of understand that, we can think about, okay, so what are other ways we can get energy? And yeah, I think that's why really checking in with yourself and reflecting on your habits is really powerful in that way.
yeah. Moderation is a massive thing as well, isn't it? I
Yeah, for
sort of,
sure.
I'm a big believer in that. You can enjoy what you want to enjoy. It's just not sort of
Hmm.
going to the extreme in either ways.
Yeah.
And I think some people do the one end of the spectrum. It's like I won't go near it in sort of fear of going immediately into like, oh, I'm having 9 cans of Coke a day, or I'm having
Yeah.
10 cans of Monster, because
Yeah.
people don't see that there's an in between. But if you're moderating it, I imagine that there's not as much issue with that. And again, it's going back to that mindfulness. But you said
Yeah.
there that you pinpoint it with people and sort of provide them with alternatives. What would be some of
Mm.
them alternatives for people who are always reaching for, caffeine and their sugar and things like that? What would you be recommending to them?
Yeah, so I think the first step that I would look at with someone is their general dietary habits. So, what are they having for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks? Because often, if those things aren't balanced meals, then they can cause a dip in energy, and that can lead us to want another coffee, want another sugary treat in the morning, for example, and kind of set us on this cycle that we repeat again and again throughout the day. But if we're making sure that our breakfast, for example, is very balanced, so by balanced, I mean it has a portion of complex carbohydrates, has a portion of protein, some healthy fats, and a good amount of fruit, veg, fibrous foods, then the energy that we eat from our breakfast is going to be released a lot more slowly into our bloodstream. And so then we're going to feel this much more steady, sustained energy levels throughout the morning, and be less likely to kind of get ourselves on this cycle of crashes and dips in energy throughout the day. So that'd probably be where I start with most clients.
Yeah, and sort of going to that, again, from my own experience of working in offices and that, you always see meal deals, go into the canteen, that sort
Mm,
of stuff, quick fixes. And I think that's a massive issue with offices and sort of people that work on maybe sites and stuff like that, is it, people don't manage the time. And I'm not saying people have to manage the time and do things like that, but if that's something, if you let it slip, it's very easy, isn't it, to get into these cyclical patterns of not really prioritizing yourself and just going for quick alternatives. But if you take that time
yeah,
to meal prep and do that, ultimately that hour that you've probably spent doing that will be so much more beneficial in the long run. Would you agree with that?
exactly. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think yeah, I think convenience is a massive thing. I think, when people have busy jobs or busy family lives that they're juggling, they just need something that they can pick up from the shelf, or that they can put in the oven for 10 minutes, or whatever it might be. Like, that's the priority for them in that moment. Um, and that's completely understandable. Like, I've been in that position. And so
Mm.
it's really about making healthy behaviors work for you, and make healthy behaviors convenient, because if something's not convenient and we're busy, we're probably not going to do it, and we're definitely not going to do it long term. So yeah, I think convenience is a massive one.
So for people who do have these busy schedules, and it's very easy to feel overwhelmed just in day-to-day life. I know you mentioned some things before of, always being connected, always having your phones and looking at screens and having big expectations just through society, and that people can
Mm,
feel easily overwhelmed. What are some of the, maybe manageable or quick wins that people could do that you would maybe recommend to them without, feeling like they're adding to that to-do list that we mentioned before? People go into that grind
yeah,
culture, don't they? They're like, well, I've got 100 tasks on my
yeah.
to-do list, so I'm better than you.
It's
But
all a
ultimately, they're just,
competition.
yeah, yeah. And you see it so much in offices. It's like,
Yeah,
well, today, actually, I've dealt with 30 customers and written 15
yeah.
emails. So because I feel the
Good for
shittest,
you.
I am the better one out of us all. But how do people
Exactly.
avoid adding to that whilst, adding meaningful and maybe like stress busting things to the routine,
Mm,
if that makes
yeah,
sense?
yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think a good place to start is to think about what you enjoy and what the behaviors you can fit around that. So, for example, if I had a client that was a massive foodie, they love to cook, they love trying new recipes, new ingredients, things like that, then a good place for them to start might be to dedicate a few hours every weekend to batch cooking one or two new recipes, and maybe freezing them or portioning them out for lunches throughout the week, something like that. Um, but then another client might hate cooking. And so starting with that would be adding something to the to-do list. So that wouldn't be a good start. But maybe they, have a passion for football, and there's a local football club they could join where they practice once a week. They get to meet a new group of people, and they go out for a drink afterwards. Maybe the drink's not so healthy, but the social connection is, and the exercises. So I think making it something you enjoy rather than a chore, like you said, is really key, and that just depends what it is that you enjoy. Another thing I would say is kind of blocking out some time in your day. I like to do it at the beginning of the day, because I feel like you haven't had anyone contact you, or you haven't had anyone add to your to-do list yet. But blocking out some time, that's your time in the day. And it might just be 20-30 minutes, but you can go for a walk, read your book, do whatever it is that makes you feel good, but kind of safeguard that time as yours. Because I think it's so easy, like we were saying, with the constant connection nowadays, for our days just to be filled from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed with information overload, notifications, to-dos, people asking you things. But yeah, if you safeguard some time for you, then I think that can have a really positive effect.
I've never heard it be expressed as safeguard before, and I think that's a brilliant way of like talking.
I don't know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean.
That makes perfect sense to me. It's like looking
just
after yourself.
Protect your little bubble of time.
Because we don't do it, and definitely from sort of myself, there's definitely an expectation in society to be a bit of a yes man and say, like, if your friends say we're doing this at this time, regardless of your financial rather your finances, your emotional like state or anything like that, you should be there as a person or a friend, because that's just what we should do. But sometimes, like I said, to safeguard your time, I found that learning to say no, which is something that I'm still pretty shit at. But
it's hard,
as soon as you learn to say it and prioritize yourself, it creates a lot of freedom and movement to, again, prioritize yourself, not without sort of repeating what I'm saying. But that's a really interesting way of saying it, and I'm definitely going to pinch that. So I'll back you. We can start safeguarding our time. That can be
I don't even know if I said that before today, but there we go.
Yeah, well, there you go. Something. Let's make it stick. But going back to something you mentioned there about the individual. So you give two examples there of very, very different, like Joe Blogs, Jane Doe, two different people. How is it frustrating for you as sort of a one-to-one coach who I find it frustrating because it doesn't always work well, is everything we see on sort of social media and, these platforms this is the guide for the quick fix. This is the tried and tested ABC. This will give you your outcome. Now, I've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, so anyone who's listened to the podcast before, I apologise. But all of our problems, they're quite similar, I think, sometimes. But we're unique, like you said, as individuals. What would you say to people who are sort of looking at them, quick fixes, this ABC stencil? How do they learn about themselves? That's a bit of a big question, but how do they sort of think, oh, well, this isn't going to work for me because I have my own circumstances? How do they reflect? Is there any tips that you could give someone to sort of pick three things that they could reflect on? That might be a bit too hard of a question, so sorry if I've put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. It's a really interesting point, and I completely agree. I'm very anti quick fixes. All my friends will know that I'm always banging on about any like fad diet or, product on the market that tells you it's just going to solve all your health problems. It's just, huge red flag for me. But yeah, in terms of what people can reflect on, I think reflecting on your values is a good place to start, and that's something that I talk with my clients about in the first one or two sessions I have with them, because that's a really important part of changing your mindset, which I think's important in forming new habits. So yeah, reflecting on your values, I'd say, is important. Also thinking about your priorities. So for example, if this one size fits all guide is telling you to, I don't know, eat a certain way, but you're meant to be going out for dinner, or you have to work late in the office and you have to get dinner in the office every evening, for example. If that's a priority for you, then that tip isn't going to work for you. But that's not to say that you can't achieve the same results, but your path to getting there might just be a little different. So yeah, values, priorities, and I can't think of a number 3 on the spot. I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. You know, I always seem to go for like the rule of 3, and even for myself, I always feel like you've always got 2 in mind, definitely, and then there's always a third that's like loitering, but you can't just quite pick it out. But
Exactly.
no, they're really good points for people because, like you said, I think there's a lot of traps in today's society of, like you say, clickbaiting people into the one quick fix, or this solves this, and this new miracle plan or miracle product will solve your problems. Why do you think people fall into them traps? Because it definitely is something in offices and corporate culture that I've noticed is rife. There's always something. There's always someone coming in saying, "I found this diet." So like, if I eat 700 calories for 10 days and then this, or like the maddest one I've ever heard was this wasn't even an office. This was in when I worked in leisure before where I am now. Someone was like, if I tape ice to my stomach and just let ice burn me, it will burn fat and I will become skinny that way. And I was like, that is the most fucking mental thing I've ever heard. Like, this person was like,
I've not heard that before, I have to
it.
say.
Was like boasting about it. But why do you think people fall into them traps?
Yeah, it's crazy. Like we kind of laugh about it, but it's actually quite scary and quite sad that there's that information out there. Someone somewhere is putting that out on the internet. If you strap ice to your belly, you'll burn fat, or whatever it is. Which, I have no reason. I don't believe that's true. And people are believing it because, people are believing it because they're desperate for a solution. And yeah, I think people kind of fall into the trap, if you want to call it that, because they are really like hungry for change, and there's so much information out there that it's quite hard to distinguish truth from lies, essentially. And people want results fast as well, and these things, whether it be like a drink or a plan or whatever it is, but they often, part of their selling point is that you'll see results in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or immediately, and people want that instant return. And
100%.
the truth is, if you want sustainable results when it comes to your health, it takes time, and it takes things like habits and personalization, and there's going to be ups and downs. The path isn't going to be linear, but if you do it that way, then you actually can get the results for life, essentially, or for decades, rather than just being on this kind of roundabout of trying different quick fixes and failing and trying another one. And I've never seen a quick fix that's actually worked, so I think that says it all.
I mean, the way you've worded that was brilliant, and I couldn't have worded it better myself. I think what I see sort of working in fitness and, when I've worked in fitness and coached people, is that people want quick fixes to long-term issues. And I don't know if that's because of, social media, and there's a lot of, we get sold again these sort of lies. Probably the best way to word them of, I did this in 6 weeks and now I look like this. When in reality, a lot of that's bullshit. But people's like bullshit radar when it comes to themselves and what they want to achieve is so grey sometimes. I know some of the most straight-faced people who are like, that's bullshit, why are you doing that? That's stupid. But if it was the other foot and it was them, they're like, I've seen this thing where you tape ice to yourself and it works. And you're like, why is your bullshit radar not picking up on that? But for anyone else, then that's where I always say you should treat yourself like a friend. You should give the advice to yourself like you would give the advice to a friend.
Yeah, very true. But also I think it's about, like I was saying before, like reflecting on your priorities, because they might not be lying. That person on Instagram that got results in 6 weeks, they might
Yeah,
have got the results in 6 weeks,
that's a true
but
point.
maybe they got the results by, like you said, massively restricting their calories, or cutting out a major food group, or going to the gym for 2 hours every day. And actually, if your priority is your long-term health, and when I say health, like genuine health, not just how you look, then cutting your calories extremely and like going 100% in the gym every day isn't going to be the best route for you, and it's not going to give you sustainable results. If your priority is looking a certain way in 6 weeks' time, then maybe it will. But it's about reflecting on what's actually important to you again, I think.
Yeah, and that's where compounding comes in, isn't it? Loads of little
Mm,
steps building up to
exactly.
massive change rather than being very drastic and very extreme. You obviously do
Yeah.
see, like you said, then people might get them results and get them, extreme transformations, but they're just not sustainable, are
Mm,
they? And something that I wanted to ask you was stress isn't just sort of an emotional thing, is it? It manifests
yeah.
in physical. Well, I don't know. This is what you can tell me. Maybe I'm wrong, but
No, you're
it
right. Yeah.
manifests in physical ways. Like
Hmm.
we was mentioning before about feeling sick and being burnt out. Before I ask this, actually, what are your views on burnout? Because people, how do you feel about it when people say it's not real?
I've never actually had someone say to me that they don't think it's real.
Mm.
So I do think it's real. I mean, um, I think it's just a result of chronic stress. Essentially, it's just chronic stress to the extreme. Um, is kind of how I understand it.
Mm.
But yeah, I 100% think it's real. I've never had someone say it's not real, so that's interesting.
Yeah, sort of like, I don't know if it's the algorithm, but you see a lot of the times these very in-depth like motivation pages and about discipline, and
Mm,
these things are important. Motivation, discipline, they're definitely factors, and I think they're sort of a bit of a seesaw between each other. You need them both to sort of
yeah,
make the either one work. But it's the grind culture what pisses me off. It's like,
yeah, me
you
too.
need the longest to-do list. You need to be in the gym the longest. You need to be the one working the hardest for the longest. There's principles of it which make perfect sense, but the way that they deliver what they say is absolute bollocks. And there's something that I've seen so many times is like, you're not depressed, it's a mindset. You're not burnt out. Like, it's just that, and you're like, why are people promoting this and believing it? But it goes back to them quick fixes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just interested in what you thought about burnout. But yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
glad
I
we're on the
definitely
same
think
page.
it's real. And yeah, the whole like, grind culture of working really hard is, I have nothing against working hard at all.
Yeah,
I'm
same.
all for people working hard, building successful careers, building lives they're happy with. But if you're doing that at the expense of your health, then it's not sustainable long term. It's not going to bring you happiness and joy, and yeah, it's not worth it, in my opinion. um and I think there's a way, and my coaching is all about helping people find a way to build success in their careers and their personal lives as well as their health, rather than having to like pick between them. So I definitely think there's a way to have both, but you've got to be intentional about it. You can't, don't just have both by coincidence, because it's very easy to fall into a pattern of stress and potential burnout, but it's not so easy to have that balance. You need to be intentional with your lifestyle and diet and things like that.
Love that. Brilliant. Yeah, again, just worded it really well. Made perfect sense. So I hope people
Oh,
listen to
thank
it
you.
and take a lot from it. But before I got off on my tangent, which I apologise for because I'm terrible for that,
No,
is
it's interesting.
I was talking about stress manifesting in physical
Yeah.
ways. What again, sort of, I asked this question. I asked a similar question at the beginning, but I want to sort of maybe pinpoint some more of the physical ways. I know we mentioned sleep and stuff like
Hmm.
that, but is there anything that sort of presents itself with physical stress? Like when I'm thinking, I'm sort of like aches, pains. So is there any common things
Mm,
like that, or people are like, oh, I've got spots because I'm stressed. I'm
yeah.
coming out with this. I'm coming out with that. Is that true? Can that happen for people? They have these sort of physical reactions?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like you said, a lot of people think of stress as just this emotional thing, but
Mm.
actually, it does have real physical impact on our bodies and on our health and can show up in so many different ways. So, yeah, some symptoms can be digestive symptoms that we experience. So, either IBS type symptoms or things like bloating can be caused as a result of stress. And that's essentially because when we're in this stress state, our body deprioritizes our digestive system because it's just kind of focusing our resources on escaping the threat or the perceived threat. And so, yeah, that can cause some digestive issues. Another one is hormonal imbalances. So it can cause, because the stress response causes us to release certain hormones, that can then cause imbalances with other hormones in our bodies, and in women that can cause symptoms like PMS symptoms. So that's really interesting. um, then yeah, there's other things like energy, obviously things like libido can be impacted. So yeah, it has a really diverse impact on our health.
That's it. Obviously, you pointed out some things there that I didn't realise were connected, but the digestive one is a massive one.
Mm,
I think it's so common, and people might pinpoint that for the wrong things. It's like, oh, it's because I'm eating this or I'm eating that, and then they cut out a food group or do it, but they're not pinpointing the source, are there? And I think a lot of that is probably with stress. So one thing that this might be a bit of a vague question, but it's the one that I was sort of interested in asking you, was people are doing this, they've got these symptoms, it can be emotional, it can be physical. They've realised they've had the mindfulness to be, right, there is an issue. What would be the first step for them to, like, right, it's time to break out? Is there sort of one clear cut thing that you would say is the breakout move to tackle improving your energy and sort of battling stress?
yeah, I would say the first thing that I would recommend people do is establish some boundaries. And that can look different for everyone, but it's kind of going back to what we were saying before, like safeguarding some time for yourself. Um, and so it might be boundaries at work, it might be boundaries in your personal life, or it might be boundaries with yourself in terms of, I'm not going to go on my phone after X time at night or whatever. Um, but being really clear with your boundaries, I think, is an important first step in kind of showing yourself that you believe that you deserve to feel energized, you deserve to feel vibrant and, not stress free, because we all experience stress, but more calm, more grounded. And you're essentially like making promises to yourself. And I think that's a really important first step in progressing forward.
Yeah, love that. Nice one. But that sort of clears that up, and sort of going from that point, I was going to ask, but I feel like it might have just slipped away in my mind when I was thinking about it.
That's
Right, I've
okay.
got another question. I'll see if it comes back. But
Yeah.
what I wanted to ask you at the beginning, and I didn't because we just got into the conversation. But was there anything personal with you that, obviously you don't have to be super personal, but was there like a eureka moment, or was it a build up where you was like, right, I've got to tackle my stress. There's something here that isn't right, and then you looked into this and found this path. Was you always pretty good about managing it?
Mm, I wasn't always good about managing it, but I, as in, I wasn't bad at managing it, but I just didn't do anything to actively manage it. I just kind of, you know, worked long hours and juggled a social life, juggled fitness, juggled everything, and just kind of whatever my stress levels were, they were. I didn't do anything to support myself through that. Um, but I don't think that was really a eureka moment in terms of, okay, I need to do something about this. I think it built up quite gradually over time. And it was just a slow realization that actually I am quite stressed. Actually, I am tired and I don't have much energy to, go out with my friends at the weekend. I just want to sleep because I've been really tired from the week. And these little things that you kind of notice about yourself. And I suppose I just kind of realized that I didn't want to sustain that. I didn't want my life to always look like that. I wanted to, yeah, feel energized and excited for the day ahead, and all of those things. And like we were just saying, kind of making a promise to yourself, like, right, okay, so what can I do to kind of get myself from here to there? And just taking small steps at first. And once you receive some benefit from the new actions you're taking, I think that's quite motivating. So then that can kind of get you on a positive path to making more and more positive changes. Yeah, and it just kind of went from there, really.
And here you are today doing this and sort of working with people, which is a really cool thing. I think it's got a lot of. I think people need it. I think people need to learn about stress more. Again, there's a lot of things I think we're not taught when we're younger in schools and education, that we get taught things that we probably never use again in life. But
Yeah.
our own well-being, I know that's getting better. That is getting better. I mean, I'm going doing a mental health week with a primary school next week, which is absolutely
Oh,
brilliant to
amazing.
see. That, yeah, like that's something that when I was younger, it wasn't even a word we knew. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It wasn't even in
exactly.
our vocabulary, well-being and mental health. And
Mm,
I think opening that up to, young people and kids, people might sort of turn their nose up at it and be like, oh, well, you're putting it into their head, you're doing this, you're doing that. But it's also an opportunity to start them off on the right path, not find out about it later in life, like it sounds like you did. I definitely did. But yeah,
yeah,
going from
definitely.
that, the question that I've just remembered because I was talking about it. Is there a point at where stress is needed? I think we talk about it in a really negative
Mm,
light, and it does deserve it in that light. But is there any sort of positives? You talked about like the stress reaction and the hormones
yeah,
that our bodies create around stress. Is there positives? And if there
yeah.
are, could you lift some off for us, please?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, that's a really good point, and I'm glad you've raised it, because I feel like, because of what I do often talk about stress in a negative
Mm.
sense, and it's definitely not all bad. And so it's important to highlight that too. Um, Essentially, if we're experiencing stress in short bursts, then it's not so bad for our health. And stress is a natural response. It's essentially what keeps us alive. If there's a threat, we need to be able to run fast or whatever it might be. And stress helps us do that effectively. So stress is natural. We all experience it, and it's definitely not all bad. But when we experience stress day in, day out, and hourly, minutely, by notifications popping up on our phone, by like negative news articles popping up, I can't think of all the examples now, but just this constant stream of information and notifications and to-dos in this very busy life we're living now, that's when it can become an issue, because we never actually switch out of that stress state and into our more relaxed state. And we're constantly operating from this stress state. And that's when you can start to see symptoms like digestive symptoms, like I was saying, because if, for example, you're eating lunch and you're stressed, you might not be digesting that properly. So yeah, I think it's whether stress is a benefit or a burden really depends on whether it's an acute one-off stress that we experience and then we realize we're safe and we like recover from it, or whether it's this ongoing thing that we're just experiencing pretty much 24/7.
Sort of going back to that moderation, isn't it again? And
Yeah,
having a bit of everything. Moderation is key. That's why there's a saying that says that. So,
exactly.
a couple of questions that I always ask, guests when they come on is the first one, which last year, and then we'll get into the second one after this. If there was three habits, again that rule of three. So apologies if the third one becomes a bit sticky again, but creating lasting impact, simple changes is something that we've talked about. Mentioned habits, massive part of managing your stress in your day-to-day life. What would be the top three habits that you use or you've seen people use that you would recommend to the corporate individual or the everyday person to have like a powerful long-term effect on maintaining the stress and optimizing their energy?
Oh, good question. So yeah, I'm just gonna go with habits that I incorporate into my day and that I think have a really positive impact on me because as I'm always talking about, it's like can be quite individual. But yeah, for me, I'd say important habits are firstly having a morning routine that really sets me up well for the day. And it doesn't have to be like an hour long and doing, half an hour of meditation, whatever it might be. It can just be 20 minutes or however long you have time for. Um, and I like to make sure I get some natural light if I can, so get outside, make sure I have a big glass of water, really rehydrate my body. Ideally, do some form of movement. So it might be like a walk or it might be a stretch, and some form of like mindfulness or meditation. It can literally just be for a couple of minutes, for 5 minutes. But that's what works for me. And I feel like if I have that time in the morning, then I really set myself up well for the day. And yeah, I feel like I've kind of nourished myself in a not in a eating sense, but just in a
You started
nourished my
started on the right
soul
foot. Yeah.
for the day. So yeah, that kind of sets me up well, and it also actually it stops me going on my phone first thing, which kind of kills two birds with one stone because that's obviously not very good for stress. So I avoid doing that and also lean into some more calming practices. So that's definitely one which has had a really positive effect for me. Another thing I would say is taking breaks throughout the day, which probably a lot of people say and is a lot easier said than done, I think. But really scheduling in breaks, especially a lunch break and eating your lunch away from your desk, can be really powerful. Like I said, stress can impact digestion. So we want to make sure we're absorbing all our nutrients properly from our lunch and also just giving ourselves a bit of a break from the emails or whatever it is on our computers. And just going for example, a 5 or 10 minute walk around the block on our lunch break. When I was working in corporate, I would do that and it would have a really big impact on my mood and my productivity for the afternoon, even just 5-10 minutes. So that would definitely be one of them. um and the third one, I would say, I'd probably just go back to what we were talking about before in terms of finding something you enjoy and leaning into that. So it might be a sports club, it might not be to do with health, it might be like a book club, for example, or making sure you go for a coffee once a week with a friend, but having something outside of work, outside of your responsibilities that you enjoy and you do purely for you. Because I think it's so easy to just get caught up in all the things that we have to do and not actually do anything that we want to do. And then that can be quite exhausting for us on a like emotional level. So yeah, I think those would be my 3 tips.
The three, you smashed the three. Well done. You
I got the
defeated.
third one this
Yeah,
time.
I mean, to be fair, when you went for your morning routine, there were some very good points in that. There was at least 4 or 5 good points, and I was like,
Yeah.
has she gone too fast too soon? Will she get to the
Oh,
third? But you smashed it. You smashed it. Yeah,
no,
the
you
morning
got your money's
routine.
worth on that one.
Yeah, yeah. The morning routine one was definitely interesting. I think morning routines get a bit of unnecessary flack. I think
Yeah,
you've got like the 5 a.m. club and stuff like that, and people sort of give it shit and take the piss out of it. But I think the principle of what it is, of just having a morning routine, no matter how that looks, it doesn't have to be 5 a.m. or whatever it is. But like what you just
exactly.
mentioned is brilliant. Starting the day off right is it starts it off right. You can't really go wrong with it. I remember
Yeah.
I used to train early in the morning. Used to be getting for like 6, train, be done for 7, and I felt great. Like my body was
Mm,
just sort of. I had that rush in the morning. I'd got my training out the way. I could come home. I was up. I could make my breakfast because I had time. Because I had time
yeah.
before I went to work. I'd get home. My sort of natural cycles would mean that I was tired at the right time for going to bed. And then when I lost that, I only then had the realization that, oh, that was so fucking important. Like, it
Yeah,
was so
exactly.
important, and I felt so much better. But I think we don't realize how important and beneficial something is until we stop doing it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
channeling nicely, I've just outed myself. So I've talked about my caffeine addiction and now not getting up early in the morning. If there was one routine or one habit that you have done in the past or never done before and would like to introduce it into your daily life or weekly
Ooh.
life, what would it be and why?
Well, good question. One thing I'd like to incorporate.
Yeah.
Um, I would like to get into more like low impact exercise. So I don't know if this is a bit niche, but typically I've been into running in the past, and also I go to the gym and I do really enjoy that. But I'm very aware of like the benefits of lower impact exercise, so things like yoga, Pilates, but I've never really got into a routine of doing it. I've done yoga at home sometimes, but been a bit inconsistent with it. Um, so yeah, I think I know a lot of people that have had a lot of benefit from things like yoga and Pilates. So I would like to get into that. Yeah.
Stretching is one of the hardest forms of training because it never gets
Mm.
easier. Like, training's difficult in itself, but if you said to me, hold like a pigeon pose for 2 minutes, they are the longest 2 minutes ever. They feel like two
Yeah.
hours because just as you get more sort of relaxed into a stretch, you just create more of a stretch. So it just gets
Yeah.
worse as it goes through, but it is so beneficial. I mean, I am as mobile as a brick wall. So another thing, I've outed myself a lot in this podcast. People are going to be like, "This guy's terrible. He's
That's
doing like a
fine. You're
wellness
honest.
podcast." But yeah, no, that is a good one. And I think being flexible and mobile, especially when we get older, is so important. There's people
Yeah.
who, like, at the gym that I work at, they're coming in their 80 and they're doing like splits and stuff, but they're the ones that are, still running at that age and still weightlifting, and they're definitely like aligned. Do you know what I mean? Having that
Yeah. It's
flexibility and
really
mobility.
impressive.
Yeah, so that is a really good one. Thank you for your time. After we're off, if you don't mind hanging around, I'll have a chat with you then. But before we
Yeah.
do
Cool.
go, again, thank you very much. Super interesting, super insightful. I reckon everybody gets affected by stress, doesn't really know
Mm.
or have the tools to always manage it. So I'm hoping that, listening to you and your sort of expertise, they can get something from it and apply it. But also, if they wanted a bit more information about you, where they can find you, do you want to just drop your socials and anywhere where people can contact you?
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, no, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been a really interesting chat. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for your time
Thank
too.
you.
And yeah, if anyone wants to find me, I have Instagram at Amy Carter Health. Also have LinkedIn, Amy Carter Health, and my website is amycarterhealth.co.uk. So yeah, they're the best places to find me. And anyone who's interested in stress, energy, I'm very happy to chat about these topics all day long. So just feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to have a chat with you.
Perfect. I'll put all that down in the description as well. So if anyone wants to find it,
Perfect.
it should be down there.